Okie dokie, here we go. We're going live again. Um, Thank you, everybody, for joining me for Astro-Babble. This is the live stream with myself, Sam Bellier, where we will talk about astrology. We have 8 charts that all of you have kindly donated to me. Thank you for everybody who responded to my Q recently request for birth dates, places, and exact birth times. That's what I need to add you to the queue. We've got 8 charts that we're going to dissect today, talk a little bit about astrology fundamentals, and give you some mini readings as well. If you would like additional information about myself, consults with me, as well as online classes that I've created, feel free to visit scorpiorisingastrology.com, as well as share this video with friends, family. I love reading for friends, family, pets, children. It's all fun stuff. Just astro babbling about astrology for an hour every morning. And with that, let's pop open a fizzy water and let's get to it. Okie dokie. So first chart. These are 8 charts that have been sent in to me. I've run the birth date, places, and exact birth times, but I have not looked at them beforehand. So I'm reading them cold, which means that I haven't taken the time to kind of pre-scan them. So we're really just seeing what I see and talking about what comes up. So first chart is Julie, who was born at 6:47 a.m. in Des Moines. Let's go ahead and take a peek at Julie's chart. We have a Taurus ascendant, brings a lot of that earthy energy. However, we have both the ruler of the chart being Venus, because Venus rules Taurus. Venus is in Aries in the 12th house, as well as the sun is in Aries in the 12th house. We've talked about this multiple times on this live stream. When we find the sun, potentially the moon, as well as the ruler of the chart, or the planet that rules the ascendant, when those planets are in the 12th house of hidden enemies, hospitalizations, and karmic healing, we find that there's a self-sabotage component to the chart. And we really need to make sure that Julie surrounds herself with people, places, and things that are very uplifting to her nature, who are really able to see the good in her when she's not able to see that good inside of herself, and to really kind of talk her down from that mental emotional scheme that she's set up to force herself into those dark corners of the mind, of the self, where she's not able to access a majority of her power. Venus ruling the chart in Taurus, especially with Venus in that 12th house of hospitalizations, does tell us that we need to be aware of Taurus body systems from a medical perspective. We need to be aware of the thyroid specifically in terms of metabolism, the throat, the neck, as well as the ligaments of the body. All have the potential to be a little bit inflamed, have the potential to be a little bit hyperactive, and have the ability to just be out of view of the health equation, because that lord of the chart, specifically Venus, who rules Taurus, is in that 12th house of hospitalizations, one of those health houses that we don't necessarily like to see. Double health signification for Julie, because she's got her moon in Libra in the 6th house of health and wellness. And Libra is that medical sign that we use to indicate the endocrine system or the hormones. Very, very interesting to see 2 of our hormone zodiac signs in health houses or related to those health and body houses. So we really need to be aware that hormones are specifically the thing that Julie needs to be aware of. When hormones are balanced, her life is balanced, and vice versa. When her life is balanced, her hormones are balanced. So being aware that testing, potentially having an endocrinologist on call would be a good idea for Julie from a medical perspective. Because the lord of the chart is in that 12th house of hospitalizations and the moon in Libra is in the 6th house of health and work, wouldn't surprise me if she works in the medical field, has been in the hospital industry, or worked with medications or various forms of the healing arts, specifically working with people who are on the verge of death. That could be hospice, that could be EMT work, critical care. She could have worked in prisons or asylums, anything that 12th house really relates to, but also anything related to those 6th and 12th house themes of health, work, and hospitalizations because she has so much activity going on in these houses. Very, very important to understand that she's really a healthcare worker at heart. And that's something that Julie's chart speaks of very, very highly, is her ability to walk into these situations and really work with those health dynamics that others might feel very chaotic in. She naturally thrives in that sense of chaos, especially whenever somebody has a Libra moon. I always find that they're a very good peacekeeper. They're somebody who can walk into these situations, very dramatic situations at sometimes, and just exude that Libra influence of balance and say, let's consider the options one by one. Let's allow this energy of peace and tranquility and stabilized air to enter the chaos and disperse and even everything out. And that's something that Julie is uniquely equipped to do. One of the things that we do need to note, though, with Julie's chart is that she's invested so much in her work dynamic that and one of the reasons for that is because her home dynamic is not ideal. We do have Uranus in Leo retrograde in the fourth house of family, being ruled by that sun in Aries in the 12th. So the idea that family, often lots of hospitalizations, lots of potential dramatic injuries in and out of the hospital with family for unpredictable conditions, especially relating to the heart, the spine, or the eyes, the signs that Leo rules. That's part of her chart dynamic. But whenever we see Uranus in that fourth house of family, it indicates an unpredictable family situation, an unpredictable home situation. Not really ideal for creating a stable life, which is why I think Julie throws herself into the care of others, because she knows that if she sits home for too long, she gets sucked back into that chaos, which is just not helpful. She uses her natural inclination to take care of others to avoid that chaos in the home, which I think is strategic. But we also need to be aware that that chaos can't go unchecked, and we need to transmute that chaos in the home into innovation in the home, and really understand that, the lazier you get, or the more time you spend cooped up in that fourth house of family and home, the more that Uranus starts to want to tinker, to play, to experiment, which can result in things going boom, and tension starting to happen, especially with Leo, that dramatic sign. But when it comes to overall making the home environment constructive, we'd really want to bring creativity into the home. We'd want to bring a sense of controlled chaos to mitigate that Uranus and make sure that we have that creative energy coming forward, but not to the point where, stuff explodes. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about? Let's talk about that 9th house and 11th house real quick. That's really interesting. We've got some fun stuff happening in her 9th and 11th, but then we're going to have to move on because I could talk about these charts forever. We have Saturn in Capricorn ruling both the MC in the 9th and Jupiter in Capricorn in the 9th house. Man, Julie, with all these Capricorn transits, your 9th house of travel, of foreigners, of spirituality, of higher education is really getting some very intense beatdown, which started in 2008 when Pluto went into that 9th house, and unfortunately won't really stop until 2024 when Pluto exits. But you'll get a sense of reprieve around December 21st, technically December 19th, with that Saturn-Jupiter conjunction and your 10th house of business success. But I think one of the themes of your chart as well is to recognize that there is a long education road that leads to greatness, and studying spirituality, studying foreign cultures, studying travel is something that I think really, really helps your chart out. It helps you to expand your social circle, to expand your influence, to tap you into people, places, things that you've never been before, that would really help you along your life journey. Hey, Remy. Hey, everybody jumping on. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting place for you to do some internal work, do some of the harder work that maybe you've avoided throughout the life, or that you need to do in order to fulfill life's purpose, is play in that 9th house of travel, foreigners, higher education, spirituality. Learning those hard lessons will unlock a lot of really fun parts of your chart. Okay. Yeah, I spent almost 10 minutes on that. Good morning, Jennifer. Good morning, Jessica. Good morning, Albert. Good morning, everybody jumping on Facebook and Instagram. We are going through 8 charts for the Astro-Babble. If you would like to submit yours, just private message me your birth dates, places, and times. We'll get you in the queue. But on to our second chart, finger guns. Let's go to Hannah Hannah was born 11:12 a.m. in Nottingham. I just live streamed to a reflexology group in Nottingham. Love Nottingham. So we have an Aries ascendant, which makes Mars the ruler of the chart. Mars is in Libra in the seventh house of relationships. That's tough. So let's talk about this. And another theme that seems to be coming up in the Astro-Babble is this idea of the Lord of the chart being in the seventh house, opposing the sense of self. When we see this place, oh, honey, and we've got the moon opposing Jupiter in the 6th and 12th. Okay, we've got tons of stuff that we need to talk about here, Hannah. When we see the Lord of the chart in the 7th house, naturally opposing the ascendant, it's an over-identification with relationships. We've got some identity issues in general, especially with work. That's a secondary theme that seems to be bubbling up. You throwing yourself into the pursuit of happiness via career or the pursuit of happiness via others. Really, we need to understand that that's just a nice way of trying to sacrifice your own personal power, Hannah, and that's not something that's super healthy to do long term, especially because that Mars is in Libra, one of the signs of its fall. In that 7th house of relationships, giving up your personal power. Relationships make you indecisive. Relationships tend to take away that Aries drive for you. And especially because you don't feel complete unless you're in a relationship, that can be really toxic to that Aries ascendant, especially because you've got Saturn in Aries here as well, which is in the sign of its detriment. You tend to be really hard on yourself, and you want to escape that by thinking that somebody else will be kinder to you, and love will heal all wounds, especially those wounds that are self-inflicted. I disagree, honey. I think that you running into somebody else's arms in order to try to fix this Saturn Aries placement in your first, where you're just so hard on yourself, is really just giving somebody else the tools in order to punish you without your sense of control or restraint, which you have in spades in your chart. You've got this lovely Sun in Capricorn in the 10th, this Mercury in Capricorn at 0 degrees in the 10th, MC in between all that. You've got this sense of strictness about you that I think is really, really strong. And I think maybe for the first 30 years of life, you've viewed as, or will view, because you haven't had your Saturn return yet, but you will view as an asset, whereas other people tend to be all over the place with their sense of self. You know what you're here for. Unfortunately, those paths that you've mapped out for yourself, not necessarily the healthiest for your natal chart. So we may need to unpack that privately. But I think one of the ways that you've really shown yourself both how you can blend it all, but in the short term, also how you tend to fall into the complacency trap of not dealing with these issues, is this moon in Virgo in the 6th house, this hyper work ethic that you've developed, this over attachment to your sense of success. Again, like I said, you did this with relationships already, or you do this with relationships. If I just have somebody love me, if I'm just in this relationship, then I won't have to deal with all of my shit. And I think that that's a valid choice, but it is a toxic choice in the long term. It can help you escape from certain situations, but that doesn't negate the work that you need to do. So this moon in Virgo in the 6th, making a loose sign-based trine to the Mercury in Capricorn, Sun in Capricorn, MC in Capricorn in the 10th. It's this idea that you throw yourself into your work environment in order to negate some of these tendencies to self-sabotage and to follow a path that maybe leads you into a safety zone, but that safety zone isn't necessarily safe in your chart. And that's something that I think we need to unpack, because the people that you've chosen to surround yourself with, although they make you feel comfortable is not always good in a chart like this, Hannah. And I think that the more you embrace the discomfort of life, the more you understand those Saturnian lessons around the age of 29, 30 during that first Saturn return, when you start to understand discomfort means that I'm growing. Discomfort, again, in appropriate doses. So not the idea of inflicting pain on oneself to the point of detriment, or others abusing you to the point of detriment, but the idea that the hard lessons are where I grow. The obstacle is the way. In fact, you would benefit from studying Stoicism. All of the oh goodness, who is that? Marcus Aurelius. The obstacle is the way. Stoicism. People like Tim Ferriss have talked about her a lot, as well as Ryan Daly. I think that's his name. Have talked about her a lot, about the idea of embracing the difficulties in order to find the life lessons and the life path. Because although there are opportunities to retreat and find a sense of ease with that Aries ascendant, Saturn in the first, Sun in Capricorn in the 10th, Moon in Virgo in the 6th, you've really decided that you need to take the hard road, because the hard road is what's going to train you to appreciate the otherwise easy aspects, which are actually traps in your chart, and unlock your sense of power and unlock your sense of purpose just through a little bit of a backwards way than most people. Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for jumping on. Please do not post your birth dates, places, and times in the comments. I've deleted a couple of those just now. Only private message me your birth date, places, and times. Let's not compromise security on this, which is why I'm only saying birth times and locations and first name if that's their real name. Feel free to send an alias as well. So let's keep everybody safe while we're doing this, and private message me your birth dates, places, and times so that we can get you on the queue without succumbing to the negative side of social media. Okay, let's talk about Jacob. Jacob was born 11:47 p.m. in Fairbanks. Let's take a look. So we've got that ascendant and that lot of fortune both at 25 degrees in Virgo, because that moon and sun, that new moon at 23 degrees, Sagittarius in the 4th house is really, really present in the chart. Where's Mercury? Mercury's in the 5th. Wow, we've got some family issues. Not necessarily issues, but just that's where a lot of the chart is pointing. We technically have a stellium in the 4th house of family and home. We've got Uranus here, we've got Neptune here, and we've got the sun and the moon new conjoined at 27 degrees, all in Sagittarius. But we have the Lord of the chart, Mercury in Capricorn, as well as Venus in Capricorn and the South Node in that 5th house of parents, children, sexuality, and creativity. So again, like parents, family, this is something that will be a theme in Jacob's chart, regardless of what happens throughout the life, constantly coming back to family, to parenting, to children, to what happens in the home, potentially what happens behind closed doors. There's a lot here. We do have Uranus and Sagittarius here. We've already talked about Uranus in that 4th house, bringing a sense of unpredictability to the family, upheaval to the family. Neptune and Sagittarius here in the 4th house also talks about substance abuse in the family, potentially escapism in the family, or a sense of almost, again, escapist spirituality is a good way to think about it. Sagittarius is one of those signs, when I see it in the 4th house, especially with so many planets here, it's the idea that there's always this craving for a white picket fence. There's always the craving for the nuclear family is a good way to say it. And that's something in Jacob's chart that I think is super duper strong. The idea of striving towards the ideal family dynamic. Unfortunately, we know that families are effing dysfunctional, right? We know that no family is perfect. We know that if they seem perfect, there's probably a lot swept under the rug, which is terribly unhealthy. Some of the healthiest families I know will yell at each other all the time across the dinner table because they vent their frustrations instead of keeping it all in. And I think that if we look at Jacob's chart constructively, we need to understand that the family dynamic is where he finds a lot of safety, a lot of security, but that safety and security relies on and rests on this semi-toxic escapism ideal of wanting everything to be perfect in the family dynamic, which is not necessarily going to happen. Nothing can be perfect all the time. And if we channel that inappropriately, it can bring some of those harsher sides of Uranus and Neptune, the escapism of Neptune, the drug use of Neptune, as well as the unpredictability, the chaos, the turbulence, the uprootedness of Uranus into that 4th house. And with that new moon, especially hiding emotions from family, hiding feelings from family. If we were to bring that into a positive spin, we can find family that does spur us towards creativity, Sagittarius being a very creative sign. We can find Neptune bringing spirituality into the home, Neptune bringing religious studies into the home, Neptune bringing a sense of higher ideal outlet into the home. And I think that that's a really great way. Like Jacob should be studying the family's native culture, spiritual practices, that kind of thing that I think would be really, really mitigating to the chart and remedying to the chart. A new moon in Sagittarius, we just need to make sure that Jacob also is able to have that private fantasy world, but also let people into that private fantasy world, to be able to share that vision for what he thinks is possible, for what he feels should be happening, despite it not necessarily happening in general. So that's something that we need to be aware of with Jacob's chart. Yeah, and then also when we see the Lord of the chart in the fifth house of family, parents, not necessarily family because that's fourth, but parents, children, sexuality, creativity, the active family dynamic, we find a really big association with becoming a parent, and that becoming a really strong part of Jacob's identity, of trying to break some of those family patterns, really trying to establish a bloodline legacy, really understanding, especially with Venus in Capricorn here and Mercury in Capricorn here, there is a sense of Jacob wanting to install a sense of rules and boundaries that create that ideal sense of family that he maybe did not feel he had growing up. And really understanding that that strictness is coming out of a place of love from a children and parenting dynamic, as opposed to not necessarily as opposed to being the fun parent. He realizes that some of that strictness has to be present in order to forge or create that ideal sense of freedom, because without those boundaries we don't have a path, we don't have that Capricornian direction that can be pursued over time. We do have Jacob, interesting. We do have a mutual reception happening between Mars in Aquarius in the sixth house of work, health, pets, and Saturn in Scorpio in the third house of writing, teaching, communication. Because there is a mutual reception here, there is also mutual reception between malefics. So Mars being a little bit more aggressive and dry, Saturn being a little bit more cold and dry. There is an exchange here, and I think that we need to be aware of medically things like Crohn's disease attacking the nervous system and the large intestine, and reproductive issues, but that nervous system skin component of Aquarius making a loose square, making a reception aspect to Scorpio, that sign of reproduction, bladder, colon, sinus, and those medical issues needing to be moisturized, needing to be hydrated. Could be a lot of eczema in the chart as well. Internal eczema, which would be like a Crohn's, think of it that way, because the digestive lining is basically just internal skin. Yeah. But then also external psoriasis, eczema, things like that. But then from a personal aspect, we have this idea of a very strict detective work almost. Detective work would actually be really good for Jacob because of that Saturn in Scorpio in the third of writing, teaching, communication, and that Sagittarius, that Mars in Aquarius work ethic of the sixth house being super focused, but very out of the box focused on a lot of interesting aspects of the work dynamic that would potentially lead towards writing, teaching, communication opportunities, being a profiler, but connecting that house of work, health, pets to that third house of writing, teaching, communication, something that's very present in the chart. And we have Jupiter in Scorpio here in that third house. So there is an idea of there being a lot of that writing, teaching, communication in Jacob's profile. Yeah, I think that's it. Good job, Jacob. Thank you for submitting your chart. I very much appreciate it. Nice guns. Thanks, love. Yvonne, if you would like a reading, if anybody would like to participate in the queue, feel free to send in your birth date, place, and exact birth time to me via private message only, and we will stick you in the queue. And that is how you get onto this. Or if you would like to schedule a private session with me, just go to scorpiorisingastrology.com, my website, and fill out the consultation request form. We are about halfway through the queue. Let's go to Lev, my darling, who's 5:30 a.m. in St. Petersburg. Which St. Petersburg? So let's. One of the reasons why Lev is my favorite, and I know Lev, and so this is just something about his chart that I just absolutely adore, is we have Pluto in Scorpio, the ascendant in Scorpio, and Mars in Scorpio, the ruler of Scorpio, all on the ascendant. Within a couple of degrees. So there's this hyper Scorpio energy to Lev, which is really aggressive, slightly toxic, very sexual, very underworldy, very deep, very penetrating, very detective oriented, very intuitive, very spiritual, very mysterious, very hidden. All of the things that we can think of that are associated with Scorpio, we have in Lev's chart in that first house of self. Wherever Pluto is placed as well, there's this idea of hidden power, power that can only be excavated about halfway through the life. And because we see that in the first house of self, the personality won't fully ripen. Lev won't become that Hades figure that he's meant to be with that Pluto on the ascendant, just like me, until around year 50. So watch out when Lev and I turn 50, we're gonna take over the world. But we do have this really nice counterbalance in Lev's chart where we have some grounding forces at play in that third house of writing, teaching, communication. We have a Sun in Capricorn, Mercury in Capricorn, Neptune in Capricorn, all in that third house of writing, teaching, communication. So we have an identification with the role of the teacher, the role of the sage. These are very Shiva type placements because the Sun, which is naturally radiant and hot and warming and very bright and solar, is in that dark part of the year in Capricorn where everything is shaded, everything is cold, everything is withdrawn, everything is pulled inward, it is estranged inward. And then we have Mercury in Capricorn, again, that idea of the vocalization, the communication being restricted, but also honed like a diamond in the throat is a good way to think about it. And then we also have Neptune here, that sense of spirituality, that sense of escapism, that sense of fantasy, that sense of murky mysticism that is, again, honed in Capricorn, all combust via the Sun in that third house of teaching, writing, communication. So there's this sage-like tendency of almost that Cohen type sage where, Master, what is the answer of life? What is life? Disciple, that kind of back and forth exchange where the question is never really answered, but it's met with another question. And that type of spirituality and that type of teachership that allows an ambiguous nature to the writing, teaching, communication, but also a very prolific and focused, a honed, a diamond in the rough type teaching experience, which is rare to find. And I think that the sense of Scorpio power in the first house really, unfortunately but fortunately, compounds and restricts and withdraws that sense of self even deeper, leading to some truly powerful insights. But again, one of the things about having all of this earthy, withdrawn Capricorn energy that's moving forward slowly over time, and this really held back, mysterious Scorpio energy, is that both signs tend to withhold, both signs tend to withdraw. We need to excavate, we need to express, we need to get some of these solar qualities back into the chart through being a little bit more radiant. And I think that this is where Lev's Moon and Jupiter in the sixth house of work, health, pets comes forward, because this is the mitigating part of the chart, which really draws out some of those qualities. We also need to be a little bit more specific about the birth time. The moon's at 0 degrees, so that's a little bit rough. But the moon in Aries is that expressive, fiery, emotional tendency, which unfortunately is linked to the Mars and Scorpio in the first. So we have workaholic tendencies between the first house of self, sixth house of work. But that work ethic is also really mediating to the chart, because again, we have cold Scorpio, cold Capricorn, housing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planets, which brings a lot of coldness, a lot of depth, a lot of retreat into the chart. And then we have very expressive, very bombastic, would be a good way to say it, Jupiter in Aries, Moon in Aries, in that sixth house of work, health, and pets, a lot of passion in those areas of life, of health practices, working with our fuzzy four-legged family friends, and then also that idea of being very hardworking, because Jupiter just makes a lot of whatever it touches, and then that moon in Aries giving that fiery drive, that passion, that cardinal fire, which really ignites and starts and doesn't necessarily finish, but that's where Capricorn and Scorpio kind of come forward. Is what is started needs to be sustained through activating some of that solar fire, as opposed to starting something and then the own love zone tendencies of embodying Scorpio Capricorn, which take that spark that comes forward and immediately smothers it with what ifs. That needs to stop. And we actually need to let some of that Aryan fire blossom, where we get that Aries energy to both come forward and sustain, and get some long-term Capricorn help from that. And I think that one of the things that Lev needs to recognize with these placements is understanding that because there's so much internal dialogue, because there's so much purification and distilling would be a good word, of all of those Scorpio and Capricorn energies coming through the self, what eventually emerges through that Aryan moon and that Aryan Jupiter is an already finished product. You've already honed it so many times via the subconscious processes of Scorpio Capricorn that what comes to the surface, what actually survives that internal process, is gold. Nothing needs to be touched. Everything is authentic because you've already checked and balanced it 100 times to death. And then what actually is able to survive that needs to be sparked, needs to be fanned, needs to find a fuel source, as opposed to other people who need to filter and not necessarily need other people who need to think before they speak. You've thought, you've smashed it, you've torn it apart, you've burned it, you've ingested it, digested it, vomited it back up, and then at that point it's already a finished product. You don't need to second guess yourself. Okay, so that was fun. We're about halfway through the chart queue. Let's go ahead and keep moving on. If you would like to submit your chart, again, private message, birth date, place, exact time. I do need that exact time. And for those of you overseas who are not born in America, make sure that you're spelling out the month and the day for me, so I don't need to wonder whether it's month or day or month, that kind of thing. And if you'd like to schedule a private consult, just go to ScorpioRisingAstrology.com. I also have previous live streams on the YouTube channel. Just Google ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, and the channel will come up on YouTube, and you'll be able to see previous live streams. Let's look at Paul's chart. Hey, Paul, how you doing? Born at 1:40 a.m. in Limerick. We have an Aquarius ascendant, which makes Saturn the ruler of the chart. Okay, we have some outer planet transit here, as well as Uranus. So Uranus is in Aquarius, the sign that it naturally rules secondarily. It is retrograde. It is in that first house of self. And then we have Saturn and Aries in the third. Oh, that's so interesting, Paul. You're such a mad scientist. I love it. That's something that I personally really enjoy Aquarius. I enjoy all of the zodiac signs because they're friends, they're family to me at this point. I know them. I know who they are. They are my people. I've studied them for over 14 years. Like they're my kin. But whenever I see Aquarius expressed really, really healthfully in the chart, I get super excited, because Aquarius is that Prometheus archetype that really is able to bring that intellectual fire down to earth, that's really able to tap into some massively creative energies in the ether and channel those very effectively. Unfortunately, with Paul, we have this Uranus in Aquarius retrograde, going backwards in the first house of self. So there's a little bit more mad than scientist is a good way to think about it. And we need to work a little bit more on our communication style. And we have other things that will support that. And we'll talk about how specifically Children are a great way to mediate the madness of the science and passing down your ideas to the next generation, disseminating the information that you've gathered and teaching it to your children, teaching it to, it doesn't necessarily need to be your biological children, but your friends, your family, the people who you hold close and trust, teaching them the ideas that you've drawn down, those people you've attracted that can translate your own unique brand of crazy, your own unique kind of, again, mad scientist theories, and let them disseminate it into the world for you so that you don't necessarily need to be doing all of this translating yourself. That's something that I see a lot with Aquarius. And a lot of my Aquarius friends are like, Sam, I don't get it. I say things, but they don't come out the way that I mean. And then people just look at me like I'm weird. I'm like, Aquarius is weird. It's the weird sign of the zodiac. You're not really supposed to understand it. It's supposed to be out of your limit, out of your range. So we need to surround Paul with people, places, things that can kind of get that wavelength that he's on and really understand a lot of the tinkerings of the mind, because there is a lot and there is a lot of value there, but that value also needs to be shared. And I think where it's going to be shared is via kind of via the long way around, really, because we have Saturn in Aries in the third being ruled by Mars in Taurus in the fourth, which is then subsequently, and Mercury in Taurus in the fourth, which is subsequently being ruled by Venus in Gemini and the Sun in Gemini in the fifth, hitting that North Node in the ninth of higher education, travel, foreigners, where we want Paul's ideas to get to up in that ninth house. So we have this dissemination process of the ruler of Paul's chart being in that writing, teaching, communication space, really, really identifying with that teacher archetype. But that teacher archetype is in its detriment. It's in Aries. Saturn doesn't really like to be in Aries that much. And the South Node is here. Paul already knows the ideas. There's just this issue, this energy suck, how to get the ideas out there. And we really need to move through the chart to understand that the family, the home life is where the ideas first get shared. The Mars in Taurus and the Mercury in Taurus, they're not in their ideal signs, but I think they're workable. I think that it's a good blend where we have this ability to stay with friends and family and to say, look, this is what's on my mind, and to keep coming up with these ideas and going over these ideas over and over and over. Back to that theme of purification that Lev did so well in his chart, Paul needs to learn how to do. The idea of using other people as a sounding board, Paul, very, very important for your chart specifically, because there's somewhat of a self-doubt, but there's also a lot of internal processes that need to be done that aren't being done, and you need to actually use other people in your life, specifically friends and family, to help you work through those processes personally. So other people as a sounding board, very, very important, especially those you know, like, and trust. And then through them, through the parents, through the children of the fifth house, we're then going to access that North Node of higher purpose. So it's basically about you embracing this identity of being that channel, almost would be a good way to say it, of the next level of information that's coming down the pipeline, but you're not the person to deliver it. You're actually here to teach the next generation in order to make sure that they have the tools that they need. Because if it comes out of your mouth, unfortunately, it's not going to be received very well, because you're up here and everybody's down here. We need people in the middle. And that middle ground is going to be children and parents for you, the people who are in that fifth house for you, that you've put so much of your identity in, with that Sun in Gemini here and that Venus in Gemini here in the fifth, Venus in Gemini also retrograde. That sense of self needs to be filtered through others so that it can then become widely accessible. You're a little bit too potent. You're a little bit too raw would be a good way to say it, for the world to accept right off the bat. We need to get other people involved as a filter so that your ideas can be disseminated properly, and that Uranus and Aquarius, that Aquarius ascendant, can be channeled constructively, as opposed to people being like, what does that even mean? And to a certain degree, you don't even know what it really means, because it's just Aquarius. It's kind of clairsentient at that point. It just knows. And I think a lot of that will also, it'll help for you to, again, surround as people, as sounding boards, because that moon is in Capricorn in the 12th house of hidden enemies. So there's a lot of emotional doubt. There's a lot of emotional hiding. Jupiter is here in Capricorn. Neptune is here in Capricorn, where we like it to be, but there's that natural retreating that you tend to do when your ideas don't get received, when your sense of self isn't appreciated. There's this really hard backlash on you. So I think you surrounding yourself with the people, places, things that get you, that are on your wavelength, that are going to be really important to your life's purpose, but also prevent you from sinking so deep inside of yourself that we as a culture don't get access to that raw, untapped energy that you have. We need that, Paul. We need that as a society, but it needs to be, you can't hold it inside. We need you to actually say it, but say it to other people first, and then they can share it with the world. Good way to think about it. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for sending messages. I'm looking at all these messages coming in. Thank you for watching, everybody. Yes. Submit your chart, or submit your chart via private message to me. And then if you'd like a private consult, just go to scorpiorisingastrology.com is that website. Okay, 3 more charts and 20 minutes to do it. So let's go ahead and move on to Lauren. Hey, Lauren, how you doing, honey? Ooh, goodness, we got Scorpio. We got lots of Scorpio. So we've got January, oh no, hold on. Lauren was born 1:22 a.m. in Townsend. Let's go ahead and look at Lauren's chart. So again, we have Pluto in Scorpio, the ascendant in Scorpio, and Mars in Scorpio, all in that first house of self. So hyper Scorpio energy. The issue here in this chart, though, is the South Node is also present in the first house, which is that personality, that self that tends to be quicksand, that tends to slide backwards, that tends to be a little bit of detriment. So it's not as healthy a placement as Lev's chart, which was hyper Scorpio, but had other placements to counterbalance that. Here we see a little bit of that harsher side of the Scorpio energy, withdrawing a little bit too much, being too safe in that Scorpio space, and needing even more so to open up and to be seen, as opposed to withdrawing into that comfort of that gothy underworld aesthetic of the Scorpio placements in the first. Instead, we have that North Node in Taurus in the 7th, being ruled by Venus in Aquarius in the 4th, in a loose square as well. So that's where some of the personality conflict comes in. We have and the Sun as well here in Aquarius in the 4th. This identification, and something that Lauren needs to take into consideration, of creating the ideal family, creating the ideal tribe, settling down in a neighborhood that's very supportive, as opposed to being that isolated, that independent person. You don't need to be independent in order to be successful, Lauren. In fact, part of your chart's mission is to actually find the tribe and create the tribe. We have that North Node in Taurus in the 7th. Whenever I see that, especially being ruled by Venus in the 4th house of family, like, your mission is to create a family. Your mission this time around is actually to use that North Node in the 7th of relationships, and have that be the north of your personal compass. Yeah. And for you to really understand that success, as dictated by your chart, is about rearing a family, is about creating a home that is successful, creating a home that is supportive, creating a home that is also lovely and slightly big. We have Jupiter in Aquarius here in the 4th, but also Venus in Aquarius in the 4th. I love seeing Venus in the 4th house because it does bring a sense of loveliness into the home, for sure. And that's always really, really nice, especially with Venus still being technically in the heart of that Sun within 1 degree, that loose Cazimi. That Venus, that sense of loveliness, is only accessible in the home, Lauren. So if there is a sense of self, or if there is a time where you lose you, it can always be found at home. It can always be found by retreating into that part of the chart that is uniquely safe and uniquely you. Okay. What else do we see? What else do we see in the chart? Talk to me, chart. Um, we have this moon that's besieged. Besieged. Yeah, so we have the moon at 18 degrees Gemini being counterbalanced by the Saturn in Aquarius, or the Saturn in Sag, Uranus in Sag in that second house of finance. We do have entrepreneurial tendencies, especially entrepreneurial tendencies in the writing, teaching, communication space, but there's financial blockages in place, Lauren. The unpredictability of finance is something that is unfortunately very tough in your chart. Because again, the money that you would spend on yourself is money that would take away from the mouths of your family. And that can be a difficult place for you to personally balance, because there is a catch-22 with that, because in your chart, resources are slightly limited because we have Saturn and Sag here, which is restrictive. And being ruled with that mutual reception between Saturn and Sagittarius, Jupiter in Aquarius, there's a sense of the most benefic planet in your chart being restricted and the most restrictive planet in your chart being slightly uplifted, but they trade with each other. And then this moon, where your emotions lie in the 8th house of death, but also taxes, estates, business, that sense of using other people's money and getting out of financial constraints by getting into the market, by getting into being a producer, not necessarily a consumer, is unfortunately a little bit out of your price range, is a good way to say it. So we need to be a little bit more aware of money issues, saving, very, very important, but also potentially getting a CPA on your side, somebody who can touch your money for you, who's not necessarily as emotionally invested, but who can help you logically work towards your goals, as opposed to succumbing to that Saturn of being miserly, or that Uranus of being too spontaneous, too unpredictable in that financial realm, with Uranus and Sagittarius in the second, both of them again opposing or besieging that moon on either side of it in the 8th. So that's a tricky dynamic. But again, family comes first in your chart, Lauren. So as long as you understand those placements for you, it's not about being socially isolated. It's not about you being the independent person that we know you are. We know that you're powerful. We know that you're strong, and that will continue to be present throughout the life with all of those Scorpio placements in the first. Like, we know you can do it. It's not a question of whether you can do it. It's a question of whether it's right for you. Yeah. So you have nothing to prove this time around, Lauren. We need to understand your unique definition of self relies on the family dynamic of your North Node being in the 7th house of relationships, your Sun, your Venus in Cazimi, as well as Jupiter being in that 4th house of family. There's a sense of tribe that needs to take priority to all of those needs to prove yourself in your chart. So as long as you understand that balance and that dynamic, you can manage it a little bit better. Have your side projects, do you, love you, but also understand that there is a responsibility that you've ingrained into yourself that does take a little bit more of a priority. Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for jumping on. Yes. Love you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Let's keep going on with the charts. Again, if you'd like to send in yours, just give me birth date, place, exact birth time, and we will add you to the queue. Okie dokie, let's go to Valerie. Valerie was born December 30th, 6:30 a.m. in South Shields. Okay, Valerie, we need to talk about your chart for just 2 seconds, because your ascendant is at 29 degrees, 55 seconds in. As an astrologer, that kind of gives me heart palpitations just a little bit, because 5 seconds literally is all it would take for that ascendant to go into Sagittarius, totally change the dynamic of your chart, and produce a very, very different reading than I'm about to give you. So please, especially when I see a 6:30 on the dot birth time, like I was born at 5:01, like that was something that I knew. But if you were born 6:31 a.m. or that would totally change the dynamic of the chart. We might need to do that privately with a consult, look at those two charts side by side. but we're going to read it the way that you sent it, which is a Scorpio stellium in the first with not just the lot of fortune, but also Mars in Scorpio, Venus in Scorpio, Jupiter in Scorpio, and the ascendant in Scorpio. So you have this hyper Scorpio energy, seems to be a theme of the morning. But again, Scorpio rising astrology is my handle, so I tend to attract those lovely Scorpions, my babies. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what that means, especially when I see Mars and Venus together in the same house. There's an idea of gender, especially because the first house represents the body. Gender dynamics being very important in the chart. That's the identification of not necessarily having a gender, the idea of being potentially bisexual, or the idea of gender transformation being a big core part of the identity. Because that masculine energy of Mars and that feminine energy of Venus, again, men can be feminine, women can be masculine, but just the idea of that projective, that active, that initiating force is just a couple degrees away from that receptive, inclusive, withdrawing, healing force. We have those together in that first house of self. And so that gives an interesting blend of extremes in the self that we just need to respect, especially with those being in the sexual sign of Scorpio. We also have Jupiter in Scorpio here, very close to the ascendant at 27 degrees, whereas ascendant is at 29. So there's this sense of really big personality as well, big Scorpion energy, like those scorpions that were in the that movie with the Greek gods. I forget the one that came out, the Olympus movie, Titans, Clash of the Titans, I think it was. Big Scorpion energy. That's that Jupiter and Scorpio close to the ascendant. So we have a lot of Juju. We have a lot of Scorpio tendencies in the chart for sure. Neptune and Sagittarius at 1 degree in the second house of finance. Not a fan of that placement personally. The idea that money tends to be this very etheric, fairy realm type concept that isn't really mastered, but is also very important because we have that Jupiter ruling the Neptune in the second. We definitely want somebody else to touch the money, Valerie. Somebody else should give that a little bit more. Should give it a little bit more 2 cents than you do, because Neptune tends to make things muddy or confused just in general. Relationships are really interesting because we have Saturn in Taurus retrograde in the 7th, naturally choosing a partner who is super stubborn, very much your opposite, but also very dependable. Somebody who's going to be with you for the long haul. Saturn is that planet that tends to be very maturing, very matured, but also who tends to put their hooves down, and especially in Taurus, stay in one spot, being with somebody for the rest of your life. Really looking for that long-term partner, especially with Saturn being retrograde in the 7th. However, we do have the Venus and Scorpio ruling that house of relationships. So again, an over-identification with relationships, not necessarily needing to be with somebody for the rest of your life to be a complete person, Valerie. I think that's something that, for those of you who are water signs that are watching, I think that this is an important dynamic for us to understand. And I speak as somebody who has, the ascendant, the moon, and the sun all in water signs. I have a very watery chart. And so when we have too much water on the ascendant, especially when the relationships get involved, we tend to want somebody else to tell us who to be. We tend to want to pour ourselves into the vase of somebody's experience, the vase of somebody else's personality, so that we can conform to that shape. And that's very much what this chart is doing with that Saturn in Taurus retrograde in the 7th. That's a perfect vessel. That's a perfect structure. Somebody who's very rigid, who's very determined, who knows what they like, how they like it, and will not budge. And that's a perfect vessel for somebody with all of these watery Scorpio placements to come in and feel safe, to feel surrounded, to feel not necessarily boxed in, but boxed in as the negative expression of that placement, that restrictive energy that's able to hold the watery element, but also not let that watery element be as adaptive and flowing as it should be over time, and potential stagnation if that relationship isn't used constructively. And if that Scorpio isn't able to unpick some of those Saturn Taurus placements in your partner and get their flexibility back just a little bit. We have the moon in Aquarius. We have another combination of that moon in Aquarius being ruled by Saturn in the seventh. So again, this seems to be one of the themes of the live stream this morning. But the connection between the seventh house of relationships, fourth house of family, North Node is here in Aquarius in that fourth house of family. There is an idea that relationships so important for you personally, Valerie. Unfortunately, we do have that Venus and that Jupiter enclosing that North Node at Venus at 23, Jupiter at 27, making a square to the node at 24 in the house of family. It's very difficult with those Scorpio placements to want to make a family work, because Scorpio tends to get into that family dynamic and really treat them like a mystery that's supposed to be solved. And a family dynamic is not necessarily about that Scorpio energy. In fact, Scorpio can be really toxic in a family dynamic because it over investigates the people that are supposed to be loved, and it might feel like the family is a little bit more under the inquisition than being cared for. So we do need to respect that, but the idea of making a strong family is very important in your chart as well, Valerie, with that Saturn in Taurus, ruling that moon in Aquarius and that North Node in Aquarius, keeping that in mind while honoring all of the strong personality traits that are present within your first house of self. We also need to be very aware from a medical perspective that having so many planets in Scorpio does predispose you to Scorpio type illnesses, and those illnesses being a good thermometer of whether or not your body's in the right place. Scorpio ruling the bladder, the colon, the reproductive area, and the sinuses. If those areas for you start to become compromised or filled with symptoms, you are not on the right track, and you need to be very aware that that's how longer term illnesses start, are those Scorpio body systems start to become compromised. Okay, good chart, Valerie. Let's go ahead and look at our last chart. We have Dobra. Dobra is our last chart, and that is going to be it for the morning. Let's take a look at Dobra. Dobra was born 2:30 a.m. In the Czech Republic, which puts the ascendant at Virgo. Virgo ruling the chart puts Mercury as the Lord. Mercury is in Libra retrograde in the second house of finance, as well as the Sun in Libra and the North Node in Libra. That's some pretty strong financial energy, Dobra. And I really enjoyed that kind of juxtaposition with the chart that we just saw, because this is an example of really strong financial placement. This is an example of the Sun being here illuminating the second house of wealth, Mercury in Libra, that balancing sign, Mercury being that business-oriented planet, retrograde, so going a little bit backwards, but still in that house of finance, and the North Node being here, indicating that the life is poised in this direction to master this area this time around. So that's a really packed second house that I think is puts the destiny towards finance, wealth accrual, the mastery of time, energy, and personal resource. We do have that second house being ruled by Venus and Scorpio in the third, as well as Mars and Scorpio in the third, and Pluto and Scorpio in the third. Venus and Scorpio is also ruling the moon in Taurus in the ninth, as well as the MC in the ninth. And this is where we get into a teaching of the mastery of finance, Dobra. And this is something that I think a lot of people need to be aware of. Just because a planet is in a house does not mean that planet has influence in that house. It is the ruler of that house, which can be located in another house, that really tells us how things are connected in the chart, which is why it's dangerous to be like, oh, I have Venus in Scorpio, let me Google what that means. That's only half the equation, because we need to look at what house that planet and that sign is in, but also what that planet is ruling otherwise, to see how things are connected. It's why astrologers are paid big bucks to kind of decode the life. Damn, Dobra. And we have that Pluto at 28 degrees opposing your MC at 21. So here's the thing about your life. You're going to need to teach. You're going to need to speak. You're going to need to share what you know, right? This is something that is not negotiable. You have Venus here in Scorpio, which is in the sign of exile. You have Pluto here, which is that planet that matures around 50 years old. You have Mars in Scorpio here, the ruler of that house in that sign. That is power, Dobra. Your words have an immense aspect. When it comes to teaching other people what you know, your words penetrate, they sink deep. You have influence in that house, Dobra. That's very, very powerful. And especially when we see Venus ruling that ninth house of higher education and your moon being here and your MC being here, you teaching at the college level or you teaching higher or secondary education is non-negotiable, because this is also where your heart is in foreign culture, is in travel, is in spirituality, is in unpacking those higher realms of learning that are not just about ABC 1, 2, 3, basic life skills. It's about understanding how you can take those basics and move them to the next level of life experience by unpacking them through specialty. And your specialty, going back to that second house, is in wealth, is in finance, is in time management and resources. All of those things that second house really, really likes to do, especially from a balance perspective with Libra. Libra being present, that archetype of balance on that second house. It's such an interesting dynamic, Dobra, because you've set yourself up to succeed in the financial realm, in the teaching realm, in that higher education realm. But we have some roadblocks in the form of access to personal power that are lacking in confidence, that are naturally opposing your destiny, that are only going to reveal themselves over time. So it's going to deal. There's a lot of restlessness in the chart when it comes to life purpose. There's a lot of restlessness in the chart when it comes to a sense of action, a sense of drive. Those things tend to be hidden. But the minute that you stand up in front of people and you start to speak, Dobra, I think the quicker you do that, the easier it will be to understand, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. You even volunteering with friends, family, or in community organizations to teach finance, to teach wealth management, to teach people how to balance a checkbook. When I see placements like this, I often recommend working in a shelter of people who are homeless, or going to different organizations who are trying to get people back up off their feet from troubled or abused situations. You walking in and being like, let me teach you this essential life skill of finance. Let me teach you how to go through the basics of money management. Let me teach you about this second house because I'm uniquely qualified to do so. And you being able to access your voice, access your center of communication, and heighten your emotional experience and the drive of your life by teaching what you know in that world of resource management. But we also have that really strong drive to create a family as well. We have that Saturn. Both charts have Saturn in the seventh house retrograde. One is in Taurus, one is in Pisces. But this house is a little bit different. Because we have Jupiter in Sagittarius ruling the Saturn. So as opposed to the seventh ruling the fourth is ruling the seventh. So there's a little bit stronger of a family pull in Dobra's chart, to the point of like Jupiter in Sagittarius is one of the most powerful, prosperous placements that we can have in a chart. It's something where Jupiter naturally makes things big, but Jupiter in its own sign of Sagittarius makes things powerfully big. It is a very prosperous sign, and that being in the fourth house of family is a really great omen, especially when it's ruling that seventh house. But that seventh house Saturn, again, the partner is going to be stubborn, spiritually stubborn, somebody who is going to bring in that watery element into your chart and to fix you, not necessarily fix you in terms of heal you, but fixate you is a good way to say it, on the things that are a little bit more liminal, the things that are a little bit spiritual, like the laws of spirit is a good way to say that. That's what you should look for in a partner, somebody who's going to teach you, hey, you're mastering these logical things, these second house topics of really grounded, manifestation oriented processes, but let me tell you how the universe works. Yeah, that's the person that's going to guide you through your life from a seventh house relationship perspective. Yeah, okay, cool. That's it. Good stuff. Thanks, Dobra. Yeah, so that was another round of Astro-Babble. Thank you everybody for joining. It's always fun to do these. I did post yesterday the Bernie Sanders meme, which I find absolutely freaking hilarious, and everybody responded really well. I have a massive amount of charts in the queue again now. I will ask again when I need more, but feel free to keep sending them my way. I'll add you to the queue. It just might be a little bit before we get to you. I'm doing 8 charts a day, but we have a lot of people in the lineup now. Thank you. We went from 0 to 100 in like 2 seconds flat. If you would like to watch previous live streams, I'll put the link to the YouTube once this video is up in the comments of this live stream video, as well as if you'd like to schedule a private consult. I am taking private clients. You can go to scorpiorisingastrology.com, fill out a consultation request form, and or check out the online classes if you're interested in learning astrology. But until tomorrow, we'll be back 10:30 to do another round of the Astro-Babble live stream. May the stars be ever in your favor.